Joined today by Lauren Ashcraft, Democrat for Congress in New York's 12th District. Lauren, how are you holding up over there?
I'm good, and thank you so much for having me. Definitely, it's a challenge out here in New York City because you have the gravity of understanding that so many people around you are sick and so many people have been lost because of this pandemic. And also, just the whole change in the way of life and questions about whether you have a job. It's all just a very traumatic time. So we're refocusing a lot of our energy on just doing wellness checks on community members at this time and stepping in to help where we can.
How, as a political campaign, are you finding that you're most able to directly help?
Mm. So we do these wellness checks. So in a normal campaign, when there's not something so huge and traumatic going on, about now is when we would be knocking on as many doors as we can, and once we're done with our universe, then we start back up again and touch base with everyone again. So now that we are right in the middle of this pandemic, we're doing calls instead of knocking on doors, but those calls are first and foremost wellness checks. So whenever somebody in the community says like they can't afford groceries, we redirect them to resources for money like cash assistance, grocery assistance. And if somebody just can't leave their home and they need us to pick something up, then we have a network of volunteers that are spread throughout the district, and we've picked stuff up for people too.
I've got to ask. I mean, so what is that? How does that conversation go? I mean, is there still a point where you have a volunteer plug and say, "Don't forget to vote for Lauren" at the end, or like, do they talk about your policies at
Um,
all, or try to convince the voter, or are you really just checking in on people?
so it's really kind of dependent on the situation. So like if somebody's really struggling or sick, then it's just a wellness check. But if somebody is like, "Oh no, I'm doing well," like what campaign are you calling from again? Then we go into you know what I mean? So it kind of depends. We're really treating this like human interactions as it always should have been. So the script is we have a really amazing team of volunteers that are very perceptive and compassionate people. So if somebody's just having a really rough time, we've also had people just listen. And we've had like senior citizens say this is the first call they've gotten in a while, and they were just really happy to talk to someone. And in those cases, if our volunteers are comfortable staying on the phone for a few minutes or however long they're comfortable, then we totally encourage it.
It's amazing. I mean, and there's a level of I feel like genuineness that seems to come from you on this subject that is it's really refreshing, and I'm certain it's something that frankly people are not used to receiving these types of phone calls from a political candidate or from her volunteers.
Thank you.
Let's get into your race specifically. What made you decide that you wanted to run?
It's just been my entire life that I've seen everyday people with everyday types of issues just go completely ignored. And so I grew up just knowing like my one grandfather was killed in a coal mining accident by corporate greed. And my grandmother, who was a Japanese immigrant, was left to feed her family from Social Security checks. I just grew up understanding that and also understanding the trials and tribulations she had as a Japanese immigrant, um, just kind of navigating a country that certainly still does have a lot of xenophobia and racism. And we're seeing that really in huge amounts right now. The Asian community is experiencing a lot of hate crimes and attacks because of the connection that our president keeps trying to make between China and the coronavirus. And it's just really unfortunate. I know in Brooklyn, for example, a woman was, I think she was checking her mailbox and got attacked by acid from somebody who is just racist against the Asian community. So we're seeing all that right now, and the issues that for example, my grandmother struggled with haven't been resolved. So what the heck? And that's just one side of my family. On the other side, my grandfather fell and unfortunately became a quadriplegic when I was a kid. And I just grew up seeing that the responsibility of making sure he was okay was my family's. And thank goodness he was towards the end of his career and had some savings, because that all gets wiped out if you have to hire caretakers, if you have to get special equipment, if you have to redo your home because you have to make it wheelchair accessible. Everything you think you have goes away with situations that you can't even imagine. And I just grew up very aware of the fact that every one of us could become a quadriplegic from one day to the next, and everything could change. So I grew up just of the mindset that, of course, that's our responsibility. And of course, the government's not there to take care of us. But I studied abroad. I went to school. I see how things are done outside of this country. And it's really upsetting to me. The more and more that you learn about how other countries do things, you see that our politicians, our representatives, have a choice to give us a safety net and have a choice to stick up for us and fight for us, but they just choose not to. And so whenever I live in New York's 12th Congressional District, it is a very strong representation of wealth inequality. I'm sitting in Queens in Long Island City right now, and it is the home of Billionaire Row. It's the home of Queensbridge, which is the largest public housing complex in the Western Hemisphere. And the difference between the two, and the fact that thousands and thousands of people sleep on the street every single night, and that number is growing in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis. It's just all of this coming together. It's like, I can't sit it out. And it's time. And it's not okay to have somebody who's been in office for 26 years, who takes a lot of money from corporate PACs, who signs on to stuff sometimes, but doesn't use the platform that she has to change public perception and start conversations and fight for things. She signed on to the Green New Deal, which a freshman congresswoman came with that idea, and she signed on to it. But what if my representative had been fighting for something similar for the last 26 years? Maybe our district wouldn't be flooding. Maybe we wouldn't have to bury our green spaces and rebuild them 8 feet higher with a flood wall, which is seriously happening. It's unfortunate that we have been sold this idea that our representatives just have to kind of sign on to stuff sometimes, and that means they're doing their job. But we're seeing with the youngest, like the newest members of Congress, and it actually, just to correct myself, it has nothing to do with age. If someone were 113 and they were grassroots and people powered and fighting for us, I would be a huge fan. But the newest member of Congress, newest members in the squad, we're seeing these ideas just become part of everyday conversation. And we're seeing that we can make the Green New Deal part of our daily life, and everybody knows what it is. So why haven't our representatives been doing that? And it really goes back to the fact that we bring a different tool set, us grassroots progressives, and we're totally only influenced by the people. We're influenced by our own struggles and our own families. And there is no amount of money that some big real estate developer company can throw at me so that I fight for Amazon to come in and get billions of dollars of incentives. That's never going to be me, but that's my opponent. And there's no amount of defense contractor or weapons manufacturer money that could be thrown at me so that I vote for a war. That's not me, but that's my opponent. And it's just, I'm so angry. I'm running because I'm angry, and I'm running because I feel we deserve much better.
I wanted to touch off. You mentioned the Green New Deal, which is it's a huge conversational topic right now. It's a broad approach, and it is maybe kind of vague. Is like one of the criticisms that gets lobbied against it. What are some of the specific policies that you would like to see implemented through that approach, through a Green New Deal?
So with the Green New Deal, what's really exciting is it comes with jobs, and it is kind of a throwback to the New Deal in that it's a job program in which the jobs are used to make sure that we're moving to 100% renewable energy. And it's a total win-win situation where people get training and a livable wage, and we're also moving to fight for our infrastructure and just fight for the future of our planet and life on this planet. So you know what, we can add more details. And I know one thing that I am fighting for is that public transportation is free. And that money comes from the federal government. And for communities like mine, where people get arrested for not having $2.75 to swipe at the subway turnstile, this would accomplish so much in incentivizing people using the greenest method of transportation, and helping people get to their jobs where they can earn a livable wage. But it also will help to incentivize, fighting for people not going to prison for being poor.
I mean, which is incredibly important, and we're seeing that gain traction. We're seeing that as an idea gain traction right now. This idea that transit should be free, people shouldn't be criminalized for getting to work. We're also starting to see conversations, though, just in the last month that are almost the opposite in one respect, which is avoid public transit. Do you think there's going to be hesitancy or reluctancy, even on the left, from adopting public transit, especially in parts of the country that aren't reliant on it currently? Do you think that's going to be an issue post, coronavirus?
I mean, this will come to an end, and the issues that we had before coronavirus are still going to be there, and they're going to be worse at that point, because we've kind of set everything else aside. So I will do everything I can to make sure that people understand, yeah, we do still need to move towards incentivizing taking the greenest method of transportation possible. And also, the pandemic wouldn't have spread at this magnitude, at this rate, if our administration had been more responsive and responsible. And I remember very, very well, it's burnt into my brain, unfortunately, that our president was calling it a hoax for quite some time. So whenever we're talking about public transportation being dangerous and where pandemics spread, we wouldn't be in this situation. We might not even be on lockdown had our federal government reacted in an appropriate way months ago. So I'm still going to fight for making sure that people don't get arrested if they don't have $2.75. And we still do have the climate disaster looming over all of us. That's not something that has gone away. So we still have to be fighting, and not just incrementally, but really, really aggressively.
What other policies do you think are going to be really important moving forward, after coronavirus? And what do you think the emphasis should be? Should there be kind of additional medical response? Should we be focusing on the healthcare system and on prevention? Or do you think we need to move on and start tackling the next big challenge like climate change or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of at a point where we don't get to just choose one. We're in multiple crises at once. So definitely we have to move forward with fighting the climate disaster. But Medicare for all is something, like, whenever I talk to any future constituents, anyone in the community, and we're kind of just asking what's important to them or what issues are scariest to them right now, it's the climate disaster. And it's the fact that in my district alone, there's over 23,000 people that don't have any health insurance. So that doesn't go away if we call for just coronavirus treatments to be paid for. Those 23,000 people, and that number's grown because people are losing their jobs. Those thousands and thousands of people are still there, afraid to go to the doctor because they will go into a lifetime worth of debt for seeking the care that they need. And it is through no fault of their own that they don't have health insurance. I'm really lucky. I thank my lucky stars every single day because I don't have a job and I have a partner who does for now. And I rely on him to have the coverage that I need. Otherwise, I would go into a lifetime worth of debt myself. So that doesn't go away because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I can't get behind the messaging of, you know, giving people money to pay for Cobra, giving Cobra money so that it's cheaper. I can't get behind that. We're so far beyond incremental steps that we could possibly take being a solution that would actually make a difference. We have plans written out. We have detailed plans about how we could get Medicare for every single person, Medicare for all. And it is so time that we move down that route and just do what the majority of people are asking to do. It's not the case in any other of these first world countries that if you lose your job, you lose your health care. In what world is that acceptable? But we're seeing that happen because these huge corporations and CEOs and everything, they're throwing this money at our representatives, even though it would be cheaper for them to have Medicare for all. We're seeing that maybe they don't want us to have the option of leaving if we have all the benefits we need anyway.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely a good point, is that these incremental steps are not ever going to be capable of getting us to where we need to go. But it does raise another question, I think, which is something that, there are a lot of Democrats, some of whom agree with goals like universal health care, but their fear about some of these, young progressive challengers like yourself is that they might be inflexible when it comes to actually legislating, that if it's not Medicare for all, you won't sign, or vote for, wrong verbiage, but you won't vote for, any bill that might expand health care or that might help people right now. Is that a view you take? Are you, single payer or bust, or, if you're in that chamber, are you going to vote for things that maybe aren't the end goal, but will still help people in the short run?
So I think my response to that is, why are we starting with compromises? Because I see these people like bring up this argument about, oh yeah, but like it's really hard to get stuff passed. And we have to write things that will actually get passed. The House is Democrat right now. So why are we starting out with bills that are compromised? We have to start off really strong. And if you're worried about something not getting through the Senate, then use your whole platform. I don't see these representatives in Congress and the Senate. I don't see a lot of them being like, hey, there's a progressive running for Mitch McConnell's seat. You have to get out. You have to donate to them. You have to vote. Like, if you want to make sure that we have a House and a Senate that's going to get these things passed, then why don't I see that kind of advocacy? So would I vote for something that incrementally helps people? Probably, yeah. But I don't understand why we're so focused on that rather than why are we putting forward compromises when we can start with really strong solutions and go from there.
Well, I think that is a valid point on its own. Something that I think doesn't get explained enough. And we actually, we heard maybe the only presidential candidate in my lifetime who kind of said this was Castro, actually, in this last cycle on healthcare specifically. Said, look, I'm for Medicare for all, but I'm going to sign anything that comes across my desk. like that's how it works. You start at one point and you negotiate backwards between the two sides. That seems to be lost on the electorate right now, and there seems to be this assumption that policy is as stated by a candidate. That is what they support. That is what they will attempt to do one way or the other, and that is what will or won't happen if they're elected. How do we go about communicating to voters that that's not the case, that there's a larger process here that needs to be engaged with, and that what candidates are saying is simply an ideological framework that they believe in and want to work within?
That's a great question. So I think this is also a divide between really traditional representatives and new ones, because we are seeing that AOC is unveiling a lot that goes on in DC, and she has refused to participate in fundraisers for the DCCC, and just really is open to answering questions as she can. And I think one of the best things that grassroots challengers can do, and especially if they get into office, is to never stop being open with people. We all have growing platforms, and what we can do with that is make sure that we answer questions honestly and be as open as we can, and make sure that we're educating people about what really goes on.
Yeah, I think that touches into something that's kind of a broader, especially in today's information age, kind of a broader issue, which is, when you're running to represent a congressional district, you represent that district, but I mean, ultimately you're voting on laws that affect the entire country.
Yes.
And you often serve as an ambassador for your ideas to that entire country. What role do you see yourself playing in communicating, Medicare for all or a Green New Deal to more conservative Democrats in other parts of the nation, to actual conservative voters, people that are center right or far right in the Republican Party, and trying to sell them? Do you see yourself being the type of congressperson that's going to be on the net and on TV trying to sell those ideas, or are you going to be focused on New York's 12th?
I mean, New York's 12th is my home, and I will always fight for them. But it is, like you said, you're also making decisions that impact, like I would be making decisions for people in Iowa. It impacts everybody's lives, the kind of Congress that we have. So one of the things that my campaign has done, and it's been really great, and I've learned so much about my neighbors and everybody who's involved in this movement, is we have 3 opportunities per week where I just sit down and I'm live streaming, and you can ask me literally anything. And it can be my stances, it can be how I feel about, I know like today on Mondays I do a cooking show, and I answered people's questions about like New York canceling its presidential primary. So we have really serious discussions, but I'm just there, always available. So that will not stop whenever I go to Congress. I always want to make sure that we have an open dialogue, and if you come on and just want to troll me, that's that's fine too. We've had that happen, but I would love to just be there and answer people's questions, and as much of my time as possible that I can use to educate people about what I'm seeing, I would love to do that. And I also come from a complex background. So I am a New Yorker. I've made a very conscious choice to be here, and I'm very proud of it every single day. And I love my community. It's really hard to afford to live here, and it's scary every single day thinking about not having an income while we have a pandemic, and we live in a really expensive city. But I love it here. So and that's the sentiment that so many of the people in my community have, is that this is our home, and we've made it our home. And the fact that we have so many creative and adventurous and spunky people working really hard to make it their home as well, all around us, it's just a really great place to live. But I come from West Virginia, is where I was born, and I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. And my grandfather was a coal miner, and my family is conservative. And I think the fact that I grew up that way and was surrounded with ideas that I no longer have, and I've made that transition. I think that also gives me a good ability to be able to empathize and just have conversations. And my family is conservative, but we've had really great conversations about Medicare for all, and they're totally on board. So I think if we remind ourselves, like, although I'm was really, really, really fighting for Bernie Sanders to be our nominee. Like I put Bernie Sanders away for a little bit when I'm having these conversations, and we talk about how my family members have lost their jobs and have had to rely on purchasing plans from the marketplace out of pocket, and what that means to people and the savings they thought they had. Just being able to have conversations about being human in this society together is something that we should absolutely continue to do.
What are, you mentioned growing up conservative. You said that, your some of your ideas had to kind of to pivot and move. What are some issues specifically that maybe you held very conservative ideas on that you have since come around on? What stayed the same, I guess, and what's changed?
I would say what stayed the same is this idea that we've been forgotten. And I know West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, whenever I see like a presidential campaign just kind of breeze past the Midwest, for example, I know that has happened in the past. Whenever I see people kind of looking at the Midwest and not understanding why they're so angry, like I can also serve as a liaison for that. I grew up in a town that was wiped out by a flood 3 times and relied on steel. It was a steel town. And whenever China started kind of dumping steel into our economy, the town died. And there wasn't another industry that came in and provided jobs. It just kind of struggled, and it's still struggling. And it's an incredibly impoverished town. So I just feel like whenever we think about federal policy, a lot of it just kind of breezes over the everyday person that's struggling all across this country. Here, we have a lot of struggling. It's so expensive. We don't have the money to pay rent. And we're right in the middle of an epicenter of the epicenter for the crisis. And also where I'm from, where I grew up, is struggling because there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's not any kind of jobs like the Green New Deal would provide that we have coming. There's just no kind of hope. And politicians like Donald Trump come in and they make a lot of promises, and that's how things like this happen. That we end up with Donald Trump in office is because a lot of our representatives in both parties just kind of breeze over everyday people, and everyone kind of forgets these are the people that we're supposed to be fighting for. And that's why we need everyday people to be representing us, is because it's us. And maybe we shouldn't have to remind people to pay attention to people like us, but maybe we need people like us in office.
One thing that always strikes me when we're talking about kind of the Midwest and the South, even the Southwest where I am to an extent, there is this kind of idea that it's like, in this country, if you're going to make it, you need to go to the West Coast or the Northeast. That's where, professional jobs are based. That's where high incomes are. How do we change that just on like just at that basic level? How do we kind of decentralize modern industry across the country? And is there a role for federal policy to play in that, or is that something that's just up to market whims, you think?
Yeah, I just feel like I'll just keep using like West Virginia and coal mining as an example just because it's something I'm really familiar with. Is you have to you have to actually understand the people that you want to represent, and I think both parties fail to do that. um, I'm so for a Green New Deal, and I'm so for replacing the fossil fuel industry with 100% renewable energy. But just saying that isn't enough. You have to make sure that you're presenting the people who would lose their jobs with opportunities and say, this is what your life could look like. You wouldn't be working for an industry that takes advantage of you and gives you like black lung, for example. There are so many safe jobs, pay would increase, and you wouldn't have to worry about your life on a daily basis. So I just feel like these conversations aren't had, or they aren't had enough. And we just kind of forget, like you said, people concentrate on certain pockets where maybe a lot of their donors are. But I want to see more candidates really campaigning, and I loved how Bernie Sanders would picket with employees that were striking and would be on bus trips with people trying to get medicine from Canada. Like, I want representatives that are with people in their struggles, no matter which corner of the country they are, even if they can't even donate a dollar to you because they're struggling that badly. And unfortunately, we have an electoral system set up in which corporations can dump a whole bunch of money into campaigns, and super PACs can dump a whole bunch of money into campaigns, and people can just max out their donations really easily. But that's why I am pushing for public financing of federal elections as one of my policies, because I really want. I know New York City has a matching program where if you're kind of a grassroots candidate and you follow certain guidelines, you can be matched by city funds. And I'm thinking about that federally, where if we alleviated this need to beg people for money and concentrate on corporate PACs or really rich donors, maybe we would see more real everyday people run for office and also focus on everyday people as their inspiration for their campaign.
You know, we're getting towards the end of the program here, and I like to ask everyone the same question before they leave, which is kind of a huge pivot from everything we've been talking about, but also, you know, maybe it isn't. Throughout, you know, your campaign, throughout your career now in public life and public service, but before that as well, what's the thing that you most want to convey to other people? What's the thing that guides you the most and that you most want to put out there in the world?
I just, and I say this a lot of the time, is you'll always know what I'm thinking. You always know what I'm fighting for, and I'm me. And sometimes people are going to disagree with that. I know a lot of people on Twitter do. That's totally fine. But I'm running my campaign. My platform is mine. What I'm fighting for is what I believe in, and that's never going to change. I know there are so many influences, and if I make it, they're only going to increase. But I'm in this because I'm sick of our representatives ignoring us, and that's never going to change. And New York's 12th Congressional District needs somebody who's going to fight for them. And I believe our entire country needs more people who are really going to fight, because with the relief bills, we're seeing all of that money, a huge chunk of that money keeps going to huge corporations instead of us. And I don't know about everyone watching, but $1,200, even if you did get the entire thing, which I didn't, if you got $1,200, it probably pays for exactly like a third or a half of your rent. It doesn't cover our rent here. We're struggling really badly. And even though people see that, you know, in my district, there are some wealthy areas, but I'm in Long Island City, and people forget that we have people sleeping on the streets. We have people who are living 3 families in a 1-bedroom apartment because that's all they have. We have undocumented 80-year-olds that are trying to find plastic to recycle so that they can get a small amount of money from their grocery stores in this district. And people forget about that and dismiss New York City as a whole for being like coastal elite, for example. I just I will never stop fighting for everyday people, and I myself am one, and it's hard to run a grassroots campaign against somebody who just kind of announces they're running and gets a whole bunch of money, maxed out donations and corporate PAC dollars. But here I am, and we actually have the largest number of small dollar donations in the entire race against a 26-year incumbent. So we're making a movement happen. The movement is growing. And if you are listening and want to make sure that we keep growing and that we win on June 23rd, if you can spare $1, which I know some people cannot, but if you can, every dollar pays for us to be able to make 20 of those wellness calls that I was mentioning in the beginning of this interview. And it also pays for over 2 postcards to be sent to people, reminding them about the election. So that is why we're really proud of being the small dollar candidate in in the race. And you know, that's who I represent. That's who I'm fighting for, and it's also me. So I really look forward to staying in touch with all of you, and definitely check out my website, laurenashcraft.com. Follow on Twitter because that's where I do a lot of my yelling. But we also do Twitch events where we play video games together, and I answer your questions there. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Vote Ashcraft too, and we have some fun together while we're also fighting to save the country.
You know, I said that was going to be the last question, but then you mentioned that I can't let you go without asking one more thing.
Awesome.
What's your favorite video game?
I love it's a hard one. I really love sandbox games, and I've had a really hard time putting Zelda Breath of the Wild down. It is like the largest sandbox I've ever had. So, but I loved Ocarina of Time growing up. I love you know what? I've live streamed myself playing The Sims, and it's a lot of fun. Any kind of game like Animal Crossing, I'm not allowed to get. My campaign manager says I'm allowed to get it as a reward after the campaign. But I see people playing that and I FOMO really badly because that is also a giant sandbox where you get to plant plants and find dinosaur fossils, and it sounds great.
Well, there you go, guys. Lauren Ashcraft, Democrat and gamer for Congress in New York's 12th district. Thank you so much for coming on, Lauren.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.